Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to the STP Training Webinar Series. Today we are hosting a panel discussion, the topic for which is testing in DevOps. Our esteemed panelists for the day are Theresa, Neate, and Hilary, Weaver-Robb. I'm Smita Mishra, a professional tester myself, and I'm excited to host you all and Theresa and Hilary on our STP webinars. Quick information for all of you. Our upcoming conference, Spring 2019 STP Con, is just a week away. In fact, not even a week. It probably almost starts on Sunday. And it's actually being held in San Francisco from 1st of April to 4th this year. The program is up for your review. The topics range across automation, AI, machine learning, DevOps, performance testing, leadership, mobile testing, security, and so much more. So you still have time to register. And don't forget, you can still save big on alumni and team registrations. Should you have any queries, do contact the STP team at the given email ID, that is info@softwaretestpro.com. Another quick piece of information I'll share before I move further forward is there is an upcoming webinar, AI Test Generation, what we learned so far on 8th of May. The speaker is a very well-respected one on AI, Kevin Suresh. He is the CEO and CTO for appvents.ai. The link is up for you to review and register. Please go for it. And if you are on Twitter, please share the conference information and about this webinar with your followers and connections. You can also add STP's Twitter handle to your tweets, which is @SoftwareTestPro. You could put your hashtag as STP webinar. And please note down this Twitter handles for the speakers today, which is Theresa, Neate, and G33K Lady. Okay, so panel time. Let's get started with it. And a very warm welcome, Theresa and Hilary. We are very thrilled to have you both with us today. And let me quickly introduce you for all of us here. Theresa is a senior developer advocate, lead quality analyst, and test consultant with several years of leadership experience. She loves to lean and who loves lean and agility and advocates for holistic system quality and systems thinking. In her spare time, she studies a diploma of networking, freelance blogs for Tech Target, DevOps Agenda, sits on their advisory board, and co-organizes and contributes at DevOps Girls. She's a lifelong, eternally curious skeptic and learner. Is there anything she doesn't do? Okay. And let's come to Hilary. And Hilary Weaver-Robb is a software quality architect at Detroit-based Quicken Loans. She's a mentor to her fellow testers, makes friends with developers, and helps teams level up their quality processes, tools, and techniques. Hilary has always been passionate about improving the relationships between developers and testers and evangelizes software testing as a rewarding, viable career. She runs the Motor City Software Testers Users Group, working to build a community of quality advocates. Hilary tweets a lot as G33K Lady, and you can find tweet-by-tweet recaps of conferences she attended, as well as her thoughts and experiences in the testing world at her Twitter. And personally, I have always found her Twitter name very fascinating. It says Hilary Eka H-bomb. I don't know. I'll definitely make a point to mention that when I'm asking her to introduce herself. All right, so let's get started with the discussion. And very warm welcome again, Hilary and Theresa. And let us start unfolding the mystery of DevOps and what it means for the testers.
Thanks for having us.
Hi there.
So Hilary and Theresa, I'll probably just go ahead and start putting forward the questions and we can have a discussion. I mean, there's no particular order in which you have to respond, but maybe I can just start with one of you and then we can pitch in. All right?
Yep.
And before we go forward, Hilary, what is it about your Twitter handle?
Okay, so it's actually Geek Lady. I've been known as Geek Lady for a long time. I chose that even before I got on Twitter, and that was in like 2007, I think, when I joined Twitter. So it's just this moniker that I've kept, and my website is geeklady.com. It's, how I'm known or whatever. The AKA H-bomb is for my propensity at swearing. um, I was nicknamed H-bomb because I dropped a lot of F-bombs on a podcast I was on. I promise not to do any here. But yeah, so that's why I have the H-bomb there.
Uh, you are a very warm person, so maybe all of this goes along with it, and really people don't mind that much. Okay, yeah. All right, so let's get started with defining DevOps and really what it is. So, Theresa, do you want to throw some light on like how would you yourself define DevOps in your language? What is it?
DevOps, I'm going to quote Damon Edwards, who said that DevOps is an umbrella concept that refers to anything that smooths out the interaction between development and operations. Furthermore, there's also a definition by John Willis where he talks about CAMS, so culture, automation, measurement, sharing, and then Jez Humble added the word lean. All of that encapsulates DevOps, and I would like to keep it away from strict definitions, but a nice loose definition that is an umbrella concept.
And Hilary, you want to add to that as to what does DevOps mean to you?
So I'm kind of here as not an expert, but a learning practitioner, I guess, because my organization and my team are kind of learning DevOps as we get integrated in that kind of stuff. So I think that all makes sense. I don't really have another definition for it, but it's, just everybody's working together, I guess is kind of the crux of it.
Yeah, a lot of people do relate it to continuous development and continuous delivery. So, would you put those terms along with DevOps? That yeah, they do. I mean, they do mean significantly in this context.
I think they all go kind of hand in hand, but it doesn't have to be. It's just we're owning that part of the process so that, as people that like to automate things because we don't want to do the same thing over and over and over again, software engineers and quality engineers alike, it just makes sense for us to kind of do that and get in that kind of CI/CD process. But I don't think it is required for DevOps. But maybe Theresa has some other insight there.
You know what? The origins of DevOps actually go way back to the 1940s. It's not actually just a recent thing. So to answer the CI/CD sort of question, we have to consider that the origins go back to before Agile, where Taiichi Ono was working at Toyota, and the lean movement started there, which then resulted in several decades later in the Agile Manifesto. And with Agile, we ended up improving the relationship to the customer, the speed of delivery, the feedback loops, and so forth. Unfortunately, we didn't quite explicitly include operations, and we didn't intelligently define how operations were included. And that's how DevOps was then formed or necessitated later on. CI/CD has always, at least CI, has always been part of Agile with continuous integration, where you are integrating your tests and your code continuously. Then you get to CD, which is continuous delivery or continuous deployment, depending on your context. And that too could just have been Agile. So it's not necessarily a necessity for DevOps. It is something that I feel is intelligent software delivery all the way back to Agile.
Is it safe to say that DevOps is is an extension of Agile?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah. All right. So moving on with the context, how do you see the role of developers and testers in the DevOps world? Particularly, of course, I want to hear some about the developers' roles, but definitely want to focus a lot more on the testers' role and uh, how has it evolved, as well as and how does it look like compared to the traditional or agile world testing? Theresa or Hilary, either could start.
Well, I come from a traditional testing background where way back a few decades ago, we ended up doing gatekeeping releases where our roles were very adversarial between testing and development. And not only was this unhealthy to the software quality, it was also unhealthy to the relationships, the culture on the team. The change that we see now in DevOps is people working together. It's, as I said, also the change we saw in Agile. In DevOps in particular, the developers and the testers and everyone who has previously been almost siloed into development as an activity are now also responsible for and involved in operations. This means a range of things depending on your company. In my case, I carry the pager. I'm interested in what happens in production. I'm involved in production deployments. You have to be skilled up on monitoring. So the role of the tester in the development is now beyond a silo. It's also involved in the operations of the software, even though we may still have specialists who do operations. We now, as T-shaped team players, we also now are involved in operations to some extent, depending on our interests, of course, but it's ideal that you are involved to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. Just from, starting from the beginning, helping set up the pipelines in CI/CD to working on the automation to helping the developers understand how to write the test automation, and absolutely working with the monitoring, being part of the on-call rotation. It's like a huge part of it because we're all in it together as a team. So it's not like, well, I'm a tester, so I don't have to do, on call. That's everybody's job. And we do have, the kind of first level support, like our network operations team that are kind of always monitoring everything, and they're the first place that people call. But we're right there too, and we're always checking, watching logs, seeing what's going on in production. We don't stop at the okay, we pushed a prod and we're done, on to the next thing. It's being aware of all of that too.
So what I gather from both of your responses is clearly testing is not a separate team anymore. It is part of the team. It has to, it's one team collaborating with each other with the final goal of quality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And so, but keeping that feature in mind, the next thought that comes to me is fair enough. The model looks a little different than traditional. But for a tester, how does the skill set vary? So, Theresa, like today, when you have a set of testers around you, do you think they have to have a different set of skills
Yeah, that's a
to
great
work in DevOps?
question.
Yeah.
It's something that people assume you now need is a new skill set, and the immediate assumption is we need to learn a new tool, which is not necessarily the case. What we're asking for testers to do first and foremost is to be curious and to apply critical thinking and to apply healthy skepticism to everything that they do. If you have that basic innate attitude, then you will bring the rest. Therefore, you will bring the culture of collaboration, sharing, ownership, continuous improvement. It's not necessarily something where I'm going to say you have to learn a particular tool, because you will learn the tool that the team deems necessary at the time. I'm not going to say you must learn Kubernetes or you must learn Docker or you have to learn a particular CI tool. You will learn that on the job, but you have to bring curiosity and skepticism.
Mhm. Hilary, you want to add on that? Any kind of skills that you think could help testers?
I absolutely agree with all of that. I mean, understanding kind of how your application all fits together, like those architecture diagrams that kind of, generally pass over the testers. Those are pretty important to understand, like where things live, quote unquote, live in like on servers or in the cloud or whatever. And starting to understand that architecture too is really important, just to know, what's going on with your application. So it's not just, well, the site's down. It's, you can start to think about, well, if the site's down, could it be, our cluster is down, or could it be, this or that or whatever. So it will help you kind of expand your understanding of all kinds of technology, but also the application that you're working in. And yeah, like Theresa said, don't worry about learning specific tools, because my team had to learn our CI tool, and we're learning it all together. we're kind of failing together and learning together.
Brilliant.
And that also does help us, bring us together too, and make us work together better as a team, because I can say, well, hey, I found this thing, or I added in this functionality to that I researched and everything that would help the team. Like if a certain job fails, I have it now notifying us in our team chat. So then another developer on another team was like, hey, that's really cool. Can you show me how to do that? So it's adding a lot of that, teamwork feeling, as we all learn.
Absolutely. And I definitely get that part, but there is this myth. I don't know if it's a myth. I would actually throw that on you both to tell me if it's a myth. But a lot of testers that we talk to, and since I personally am networked with quite a few testers in DevOps world, and I have some kind of insight into that world, I have my views about the tester's role and the skills required. But on an average, when I talk to a lot of testers who are now moving into agile world or moving into the DevOps world, especially when they are headed to DevOps, when their organizations are moving into DevOps methodology for delivery, they have this fear that there is a dev, there is an ops, but there is no particular role for testers. And though when I hear you both, it looks like no, there is a need for testers, and we all have to work together. Having said that, do you see programming as a key skill for testers today? That, maybe earlier it was okay to just not know that, but today you should know that, even if you're not probably using it all the time, but you should. Hilary.
So I don't know that it is something that you absolutely need to get ahead and have a career as a tester, to be able to write code, to be able to read and kind of understand code. Yes, I think you should have that kind of understanding, even if it's, just a very general understanding of what's going on in the code. I mean, you don't have to write automation to be a tester that contributes to the team in a DevOps team. We rely on manual testing a lot, because there is no time to automate everything, and even if you could automate everything, that's not going to catch everything that you need to catch. So the manual testing is there. The curiosity needs to be there. The questioning things. Does this look right? Is this happening the right way? All of these kinds of things need to be there as well. So you don't have to be able to write the code, but I do advocate strongly for being able to read and kind of understand the code.
completely agree. The thing that I've been saying to testers now for, I think, probably 4 years that I've been speaking at conferences about testing and DevOps is you need to be T-shaped. And this is a term that describes where we previously were I-shaped as specialists, sort of the vertical I. We now have a horizontal part, which is the T of our role, which is all the generalist skills that we require. So we still need to be specialists in critical thinking and curiosity, but we do need generalist skills. Ideally, yes, you have coding experience or understanding or curiosity at the very least. It makes it easier to work with your colleagues. It helps you break down the silos in your team because it also builds more empathy with your team members if you understand what they are doing. And ultimately, what you are doing is building code. Therefore, being able to read and understand the code is definitely an advantage.
Mm-hmm. And just to understand this practically, Theresa, would you be able to give us a scenario like, when you are working on a particular project or with a team, what kind of testing are we looking at these days? Like exactly how it goes, like when do we test and what are we looking at?
Well, we follow the idea, as Agile helped us think, is to break everything down into really small pieces of work. So as we are doing that, you are ideally being involved before any code is written. You are ideally starting to test statically. At the very beginning, you are understanding the requirements, the needs of the customer. You are nutting out the acceptance criteria with a BA or a product owner. That is testing already. Then I feel that it's essential that we have the three amigos, that's the developer, the tester, and the BA involved in a card kickoff. That is also testing, where common understanding is shared with each other. Once the kickoff occurs and the card is in development and it starts being coded, I advise the tester to pair with the developer in defining some of the tests up front. Now, I am a fan of TDD or test-driven development. It doesn't mean that you need to apply it at all times, but it's a really good idea to start defining the tests at the beginning. Then the developer can create the code to match the tests. That again is testing, that's continuous testing. When the card, the really small piece of functionality is completed, there's another form of feedback occurring. All testing is feedback. Any feedback that you can impose or apply to the whole process is something that I feel we should be doing these days. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to physically do the testing, but you can facilitate the testing and be involved in the testing and the conversations and the feedback. Obviously, you are a good tester, so having you do some testing is a good idea too, all the way through to production.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I would just add that as part of understanding the code and understanding what is changing, being involved in the code reviews with the developers, so you understand the code, you can kind of see what they're doing, even if you're just sitting in there like a fly on the wall, just to get an understanding of what's going on. But you can also catch some logic issues there. You can catch some potential bugs during those code reviews. So I would just, advocate for that as well.
Agreed. Good.
Thank you. So looking at this scenario, what would you think could be the key challenges for testers? Like, of course, it is different. Yes, there are some key skills you are still being curious and questioning. And these are the key skills of a testers. It doesn't matter if they are into DevOps or, if they are doing testing for any methodology. To be a good tester, they have to be critical thinkers. But are there any particular challenges you see when testers move into DevOps world? Hilary.
So with learning those tools with your team, some of them might, be familiar to the developers, but not as much to us. So that could be kind of a steep learning curve for some testers. I know it was for me, kind of learning, okay, we're learning Docker and we're learning, this and that and the CI tool and everything all kind of together, and how CI works and like everything together. It can get really overwhelming. So kind of compartmentalizing some of that and learning that. But I think as far as skills, let me think. I can't really think of anything. How about you, Theresa?
It's interesting when testers come into a DevOps world, the first thing they really suffer from is imposter syndrome. So this is something that many of us suffer from, and I almost don't know anyone who doesn't have it. So the first thing a tester thinks is they don't belong. They don't belong in these conversations. So the challenges that they have in coming into a DevOps team or a DevOps world is being included and considering themselves worthy of the conversation in the first place. This is a mindset that testers need to change for themselves. They need to consider that they are important, they're equal players, and that they, no matter what their background or their current skill set, they can add value. The best thing you can do when you join a new team and you don't know what's going on is understand what adds value to that team and learn that really quickly.
Have you ever come across testers who have like kind of given up, or kind of felt like they're misfits, or they're not able to cope up with this whole new approach?
Yes, I have actually. It's only happened occasionally, very, very rarely, particularly for testers who feel that they weren't happy to let go of their place as gatekeepers. In the good old days, testers were gatekeepers, and they owned quality, and they owned the test summary report, and they owned, the approval to release, and they were release managers. Anyone who still wants to do that will struggle in Agile and in DevOps, and quite likely need to upskill themselves or learn from other people. I don't know if everyone is salvageable. I'll be honest with you. If you feel that is that important to you, then perhaps you're not keeping up with the industry. But yes, there have been a few people who have struggled, but purely because they weren't willing to share the ownership of quality and the ownership of collaboration. They wanted to have a silo. If you want a silo, this probably won't work for you.
Right.
That's yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Hilary.
So I haven't run into anybody like that personally, but I do know that a lot of testers are a little bit hesitant about like this whole CI/CD thing, because they think, if I'm not automating, then I'm not going to have a job on this team, or they won't need me anymore. But that's not true. So I just want to put that out there too, that you don't have to automate. You don't have to feel like, well, if I can't code, then I don't belong in DevOps or on a team. I think we covered that already, but I just wanted to say that again.
No, absolutely, absolutely. You make a great point there, Hilary, actually, and adding to that, what Theresa also just said for the same context, it's like testers do feel pushed back sometimes, and it's an invisible push. It's probably a self-created myth where we feel like maybe if I don't know programming, or if I cannot automate, then I cannot be a good productive member of the team, and I'm not going to be a good fit here. And to the point that Theresa made very beautifully, that there are these reports we make and these metrics that we share, and the ownership fight. A lot of these things that exist in our traditional model, you are forced to give away quite a few of them in the better, maybe for the better of the team, and for the sake of collaboration, which does kind of change the team dynamics. Having said that, Theresa, I would like to know more about the change in the level of communication in terms of the quality of communication or the quantity of communication, if they change with respect to the management and the peer groups in DevOps?
Yes, the communication has shifted from a command and control type of communication to how do we solve this problem type of a message. And it's where previously we had very strict hierarchies in place and managers who issued instructions to be followed by their teams. We have a more collaborative culture where we trust people that they are going to do the best job and they understand how to do their jobs. And instead of telling them how to solve a problem, we give them the problem to solve. It's a different kind of message. As opposed to dictating the solution to them, we give them the ownership and therefore the pride in coming up with a solution. So as a manager in this space, I would encourage other managers to learn how to trust or learn how to speak with trust to people so that they then act with trust. And when they act with trust, they deliver better products, better testing, and more ownership, and they will be happy to show you. On the flip side, I will also say that the trust has to be so well developed that you end up being able to talk about your failings as well, not just your successes.
Yeah, so I guess, I just totally agree. I have nothing to add.
Okay, all right. So, sorry, I think I couldn't hear you guys towards the end, but I got it now. So, just to add more depth to this part of transformation, how should a team attempt this, great transformation, not just for testers, but overall? If you're moving from a traditional model or an agile model to DevOps, are there any tips that you would like to share that, maybe these things could help for the easy transformation?
So for us, it was really a company-wide kind of thing. I don't think you can do this in a silo because you need that buy-in from the ops side and from management and everything. So I think that kind of all has to tie together. It can happen slowly, which is just we started out with having your deploys are deployed by this certain group of people. Like you can't have the person writing the code pushing the code out to production, so it has to be this separate group of people. And slowly it was kind of transformed into the team can do it. It just the person writing the code still can't push that button, but someone else on the team can. So it's not something that you can really just do, I think. But I don't know, maybe Theresa, you have some other insight.
Can you repeat the question for me? I was thinking of 100 answers there, and I want to be sure that I'm answering the correct one, please.
Yes. So, how should a team attempt the transformation
Okay.
to DevOps? Yeah, from traditional or from agile model, any model they're following to the DevOps.
Well, from Agile, first thing I'll actually have to correct is that DevOps is not a methodology. It is a culture. So it is not something that we impose on people where we expect them to follow a set of rituals and then be lovely DevOps puppets. What we are asking people to do, in a previous life, I was an Agile consultant where we would parachute in to enterprises and quote unquote make them agile. And I learned a lot from that because you can't make people agile. You can only make people work together better. The thing we need to learn is empathy. So we have to understand the problems we are solving. And as opposed to saying you are now agile or you are now DevOps, we are rather saying, how can we solve your problems and how can we remove the blockers and break down your work in smaller pieces and work together easier and better? that is, to me, what I feel we need to do. Transformation is a loaded term. I would rather work on one small change at a time. The word transformation actually implies an end state, which is really dangerous because the agile consultants parachute in, then we achieve this fabulous end state called agile, and then we leave, and then it doesn't maintain itself. If you can make small changes that can sustain itself, you're on your way, and you don't have to call it DevOps, but certainly collaboration and working together and quality ownership is something that you'd expect to see.
Very beautifully said. I actually like the
Thank
way
you.
you mentioned transformation not to be the end. I mean, it signifies an end state, which this is not. You have to constantly work towards it. Great. I will just ask one more question from probably my list, and there are quite a few questions coming in, so we'll move on to the attendees' questions then. Okay?
Okay.
So, yeah. So here is the question, and the response could be totally not relevant, and say that the question is not relevant is fine. But here is my thought. Is there a cost quotient? And this is without saying that quality is a cost center. We know that it's not. It's more for the benefit of the product or the services we are offering. However, is there a cost quotient uh, or a factorization for good or for bad, whether for business or for the professionals involved, due to the DevOps, like due to following the culture of DevOps? Theresa, you may want to start.
Well, no one has actually measured the cost. I would say that the cost personally is a few books, maybe listening to a free podcast, upskilling yourself that way, but there is no cost. Firstly, you certainly don't need certifications. Let me just clear that up straight away. There's no cost to the organization. Perhaps the only cost, if you can call it that, is the reduction of an inflated middle management layer. And the cost is not necessarily to the organization, it's to the people themselves. So you have to find yourself relevant and applicable in this environment. But as far as tooling is concerned, no, that's not a cost. We've had tools since the dawn of computing, so that's certainly no different. As far as specialists are concerned, we've had specialists in all sorts of technologies all the way from the beginning. So the cost hasn't necessarily changed, other than perhaps, and I will find you a quote that I saw from Jez Humble, who talked about the cost of DevOps in the environment. So let me just find that for you. He talks about, if I can find that, in the State of DevOps report in 2015, Jez Humble made the comment. He said, "We have sound statistically significant data that shows that culture and DevOps practices impact both IT performance and organizational performance." So if we are impacting IT performance and organizational performance, we are most definitely reducing costs, although whether there is a proved statistic that shows that, I can't refer you to that. But there certainly is a report that it reduces a cost through the improvement of performance.
Very nice. Uh, Hilary, you want to add something to this?
I mean, from my side as a practitioner, not a manager level, I don't see any of the costs at all, as far as monetarily. But I think having this kind of DevOps culture has brought teams closer together. We have better relationships now, I think, so that I think is a net positive. So I don't know if that, maybe we'll have more expenses because our remote team members come into the office more often to hang out with the rest of us, but that's about all I can think of.
Yeah. But overall, it does sound like a cost positive thing. Like even if there was any impact, it would only be for good. I'll start taking questions from the attendees now. So the first question here is, there may be testers out there that say, my company is not yet doing DevOps practices, but I want to learn the process and how to be a tester in DevOps. What suggestions do you have for this tester who wants to understand DevOps even if their company is not yet doing it? Theresa.
Yeah, that's a really cool question. So just to repeat, DevOps isn't a methodology, so people don't think that it's a rigid set of principles. But for me, where a tester can really start tapping into the language, the culture, what people struggle with without necessarily being embedded in it in a daily basis, is there are 2 or 3 recommended learning things for them. Is the DevOps Days conferences, which are community-run conferences, which I highly advise for all testers to attend. Also, the DevOps Cafe podcast with John Willis and Damon Edwards. It's magnificent. And then the other thing is meetups. Go to meetups and start talking to people. Network and speak to people who are already experiencing this. Not only is this good for your personal networking, but it also builds the language and your own understanding of it. Whether you are doing it in the job yet or not, speak to these people and find ways how you can apply it maybe to your personal projects, or where you see a light starting to shine for you of things you want to learn more about.
Hilary, you want to add to that? You're good?
I'm good. Totally agree with everything.
Okay, so next question is creating detailed test plan, requirement traceability metrics, creating high-level design documents and test cases relevant in Agile or DevOps? Hilary.
So the one thing that I still do, I still write test scenarios. I don't necessarily write cases, but things that I want to make sure that I check or someone else checks. And then traceability matrix, yes, because I kind of like to map out the application, the things that need to be tested. But a lot of those documents kind of went away with Agile in general. But I do like to keep some documents because my memory is not that good. But I also want to help my software engineers to understand what I'm going to be testing and everything as well, so they can follow some of that stuff too. But they're not like prescriptive documents. It's more of like this, I would go down this path and kind of to understand what the application is doing, and I would expect it to do this or that. But that's just my experience there.
I would say the age-old answer is it depends. So as Hilary is describing there, in her context, it's really helpful. If it's in your context, not helpful, if it doesn't help you with your task, then I don't advise it. I would rather say that something I'm a big fan of is doing mind maps and mapping out the system that way, and understanding all the edge cases and possibly positive and negative scenarios on a mind map, mostly for my memory and my record and being able to share it with someone else. But I am certainly not a fan of coming up with prescriptive test plans, test cases, requirements matrices, test summary reports, and all of those things. They are not necessary, because if you had been doing your collaboration and you're sharing along the way with each single card, everyone would be on the same page. And hopefully, if you've been doing acceptance testing with your product owner, your product owner would be across the state of your system as you complete each piece of work. You don't need to send in a report to then confirm or maybe cover some backsides that everything is now covered, because we've been talking all along.
Yes, I totally missed that part of it. It's just everybody is constantly communicating, so there's no reports to turn in. It's just, hey, we pushed the stuff to prod today in the middle of the day. By the way, here's some new features.
Yeah, maybe acting more responsibly and trusting the teams and taking charge more often. Probably that kind of helps the team to get rid of a lot of unnecessary documentation.
Exactly. It becomes an overhead. It doesn't add value, so don't do it.
Yeah. All right, here is a question that I would like to hear from both of you separately is any testing DevOps resources that you can share?
Yeah, I made a list because I knew I'd be asked. So first thing I advise, as I mentioned, the DevOps Days conferences and the DevOps Cafe podcast, they are bedrock requirements. The other one is the DevOps Handbook, which I will recommend you not only buy in printed format, but also in audible format in audiobook, because hearing it both ways, reading it and hearing it, really helps you understand it. And then the Continuous Delivery book by Humble and Farley, that is something that helps understand the concept of DevOps, but it's not necessarily DevOps itself. It just helps you flesh out more detail in DevOps. And then additionally, the Agile Testing and the More Agile Testing books by Crispin and Gregory. They would hopefully have been read by most of our listeners already. So in addition to those, some of these DevOps resources I just mentioned.
And the only one I would add is the Dev Test Ops community that I think Lisa Crispin put together, testingindevops.org. That's the only one I had prepared. Theresa, you had a much longer list.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, Hilary, Hilary and I were asked by Lisa to mention this because she was going to be our co-panelist and she couldn't make it today. But she certainly, just like us, is very interested in the field, and I will be co-writing some of the articles with her and for her on this blog that she's publishing.
Very nice. That's a good point. I had thought of talking about it. Totally forgot because Lisa isn't here. Thanks for bringing that up. And so the next question here is, and it has come about 10:01. So maybe we were discussing about the ownership of quality not being with just testing team, because the question the attendee asks, what if the ownership of testing is expected to only fall on testers? Or more accurately, the quality team. So, and I'm going to add another question to it because it has the same kind of a similarity there. So I'm going to ask both the questions together. The next question is, what is your advice to testers working on a team that is using DevOps who feel they do not have a seat at the table? Or, how do you build those relationships to that so that the team not only respects the tester's role, but insists that testers are involved throughout? So, instead of having ownership of testing, so combining the two questions there, that one side says that the ownership lies only with testers, and then there is one situation where testers are not involved through the process. So what advice do you give to these kind of situations, Theresa?
All big changes begin with little changes. I would recommend that firstly you educate yourself and with the resources we just mentioned, and secondly that you then educate your team members. And with education becomes better decisions. If we educate our team members and we start sharing with them all these other options, they will buy into it because it makes sense to them, as opposed to coming along and dictating it to them as thou shalt be DevOps. If you start doing that, you lose the fight even before it begins. Everyone likes their self-determinism. They like to have a say. So let's make it something that they collectively with you realize is necessary because you have educated them. If you feel that you are in DevOps and the testing team, which I believe is an oxymoron because there should not be a testing team. You should be part of the whole team. If you as a testing function is isolated still in DevOps, it's certainly not DevOps, and therefore you should help educate and uplift the understanding of the rest of your teammates, including, for instance, conferences, helping them see your value and keep on telling them how you can add value in other places. If all of that fails, then possibly decide whether this is the right place for you and whether this is going to be good for you. But I'm always believing that people mean well, and if you educate them, they'll make better decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same there with if it's a separate quality team, then that's really not DevOps. You should all be kind of working together on one team. And yeah, just trying to, if you have like a lot of those adversarial relationships come from just you know, information or misinformation between the roles. So developers will misunderstand how testers actually work and vice versa. And management might also misunderstand. Like they may think, okay, we've come from waterfall, so that means that testing is at the end only. So you guys can just be off on your own. But that is something that really needs to be put to bed, because that's just bad for everybody. And I think if you're able to show the value that you add, not just at the end, but when you're testing, doing that static testing in the beginning, when you're helping the team kind of think about how to write the code so that it's, you know, like thinking of those test cases earlier, so that will inform how they write the actual features. Speaking up sometimes is the hardest thing you can do, but the best thing that you can do in those planning meetings and everything. Like the definition of done, does that include testing? Like that's a major thing right there. It can seem small, but that is a huge thing, where if the team thinks it's done and then they hand it off to you or throw it over the wall or whatever, that's a big thing that causes all kinds of issues.
Totally agree.
Yeah, definitely. There were these two key takeaways from your discussion from both of you. Was maybe attendees are surely listening, so they should pick on the words speaking up, which is so important, and then trying to increase your circle of influence one step at a time. So learn from the resources and then try to, pass it on to your team and help them get more acclimatized to the culture of DevOps.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So the next question is, there are many tools to support the DevOps world. If you could only pick one technical tool that a tester should know within DevOps, what would it be? Hilary, you want to go for it?
Oh boy. I mean, so with all of the tools that we use, trying to think which one is like the best tool. I think Docker has been really, really helpful in a lot of things that I do, even outside of this whole DevOps stuff. It's helped in testing and everything for me. But man, I don't know if there is like one single tool, because there are so many tools in DevOps and CI/CD. There's in Agile, in everything. So that's like, picking your favorite child. It's really hard to choose.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah, well, you probably predict my my response to this is exactly what was just said by Hilary. I have a personal inkling to lean towards operations and monitoring. So I would say you would rather, if you're going to do anything, learn how to monitor the system. In other words, carry the pager, understand how to read logs, understand how to read your system as it is deployed into production. I'm not going to call out a tool because I feel that that would just exclude everything else and make everything else more more tactical as opposed to strategic and useful. So if you are going to do something, how about you pay attention to what's going on in production and learning how to monitor production activity and alerts and how people respond to those alerts.
The best
I
tool is your
totally,
brain.
Exactly.
There you go. Can't go wrong.
Yeah.
totally expected this from Theresa because I remember we had our last discussion where you said no tools, focus on skills. So uh, learn monitoring and reading logs, probably one of the better skills to develop.
You got it.
Okay, the next question here then is, do DevOps teams typically have more or less testers than a more traditional team? Theresa.
Oh, well, typically less because the whole team is now testing. Where maybe in the past, the development team or the developers would palm off testing to the testers, and therefore you'd have to have, I say sort of in jest, that you have these battery hens of testers who just churn out tests. You no longer need battery hens of testers. You now have less testers, but more team players. I don't feel that where we previously produced these en masse certifications in testing and everyone would come out the other side as a certified tester, and now you can get a job and you can pass tests on a team some way. What we have now is people who are multi-skilled and can do more things. And if you're still calling yourself a tester to this day, you will no longer be part of a big battery team of testers. You'll be just one or two testers, depending on the criticality of your system. And other testers would have moved on to other roles or other skills that they enjoy more, that they have found that they can now diversify into.
Yeah, totally agree with that. It really depends on the team also. So my team, I'm the only tester on my team, but I have been since before this, you know, DevOps stuff going on at work. So it really depends because my team, my software engineers, they're writing tests too. They're writing the UI test automation, the API test automation, their unit tests. They're doing manual testing. They're doing all of that stuff. So it really depends.
Exactly.
That actually makes sense, but on an average, it looks like from the outside that typically it will be a reduced number, but maybe it's not really practically that. It will all depend on the project to project basis. Okay, so here's the next question that says, what are the best practices for reporting QA findings in DevOps?
Wow.
Theresa.
QA findings in DevOps. Well, I think it's your mouth. So you probably need to speak to people. Ideally, your team is co-located. If they're not co-located, at least they are. If they're distributed, then they're accessible to each other in real time, hopefully, depending on time zones. You would need to speak to someone, ideally as soon as you find a discrepancy, so that some understanding is mutually evolved on what is occurring. If after the discussion you find that, yes, it is a bug, well, then it's really simple. You move the item that was being tested into development, and the developer fixes it. If it was already in production, well, you can't necessarily put it back into development, then you would need to talk to your Scrum Master or your iteration manager or your team leader or whoever is doing that hat to figure out how to put it on the backlog to be prioritized. So it's not necessarily something that is a process per se, but it requires that you collaborate. I will make a quick shout out to the Black Box Software Testing series of courses, the one where we talk about bug advocacy. That is something that to this day I value highly, where we learn how to communicate bugs and share it with others and be able to write up a report if your team isn't right next to you so that someone can have a look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my team is 100% remote, so we rely on our team chat. We do phone calls and screen shares. But yeah, that first step is posting in team chat, or calling that person up and like, hey, I found this issue. I have found using copious screenshots, even animated GIFs or videos recording like what I'm actually doing, because they're not co-located with me, and putting those in the bug have helped tremendously. We don't have that kind of churn of, the bug ping pong going back and forth between the developers and myself, because we have that conversation. I put those artifacts in there, so if it doesn't get fixed for 6 months, I can come back and look at the bug and understand exactly what happened too. Like I said, I have bad memory, so it helps me as much as it helps the rest of the team. But yeah, definitely starting with that conversation, whether you're right there or you need to reach out on chat or something.
Completely agree.
Yep. And since we are already running out of time, I'll just take one more question and then maybe send rest of the questions to you all both. And you could respond back with anything that we did not answered here, and we can publish them as on the blogs or as blogs on the site. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's the last question. There's so many still coming in. My company has many compliance processes we must abide by, being in the financial domain. How does DevOps work when the risk of failure could harm people's money and/or company reputation? Hilary, you want to go first?
Sure. So I am in the financial sector as well, fintech. I work at the US's largest online mortgage lender. So that is very important to us to make sure that we don't bring things down. The point of kind of DevOps and this whole CI/CD thing is, one, you have those controls in place. Like I said before, we're not continuous deployment or continuous delivery yet. And I don't know that we will be because of those regulations, but we definitely have that continuous integration going. And when we want to push to production, we need someone who is not the original developer to push that button or to trigger that process. But the whole point of DevOps and stuff like that is to make it less painful when you're pushing to production, make it less painful when there are issues. So if there's a backup process that needs to run, that needs to be tested out. We've had issues in the past that require kind of all hands on deck from 5 a.m. when we pushed to way too late. And this kind of helps get rid of that, because it makes those painful things less painful, because you're going to go through it more often, which is kind of like, why would we want to do that? But it helps make it less painful, and it helps make it less of a thing. Like I said, we can push to production in the middle of the day and nobody notices because of the processes that we have in place now. So you definitely will have some of those things that you have to watch out for because of compliance reasons and things like that. But there's a lot of it that you can still do a lot faster and easier and less painfully.
Yeah, the message here is that DevOps is not an end state. So we really shouldn't attempt to have an end state of perfection. Any sort of improvement is an improvement. The context-driven school of testing will understand that depending on the context, you have different things going on. We don't want to enforce any sort of practices or any sort of dogma. That's the last thing you want, because the minute you do that, it becomes religious and inflexible. We want this to be flexible. So depending on the needs, you do that to make it work, and you find ways within your context to make things easier and more efficient.
Great. There's so many questions coming in still, but since we are running out of time, we'll have to close here. And attendees, I see a lot of you sending questions for books and links, details. We are going to collect them from both the speakers, and we will publish them on the site so that they both can give their preferences on learning resources. All right. So thank you so much, Hilary and Theresa. It was a very insightful session on testing in DevOps, and I'm sure our attendees found it very informative and useful too. So thanks again, both of you, and I hope to see Hilary and Theresa both at some STP cons very soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Well, everyone, this concludes our webinar for today. Thank you for joining, and more importantly, thank you for asking so many questions and being an engaging audience and making the most of the webinar for yourself and for the whole group. And if you want to see more such sessions from speakers like Hilary and Theresa and many more, and wish to learn more about testing, do join us next week at STP Con Spring 2019. Don't forget to ask for the available discount offers at info@softwaretestpro.com. Stay tuned for more webinars and online trainings coming soon at softwaretestpro.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the upcoming webinar, which is AI Test Generation, what we learned so far on 8th of May by Kevin Suarez, then the link is up for you to register at softwaretestpro.com. Please go for it. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week ahead. See you all next week in San Francisco. And you've learned so much about DevOps today. Please do keep practicing your testing skills. Thank you.